Excellencies, distinguished guests, Bapak-bapak dan ibu-ibu sekalian. It has been an incredible day. The passion and positive energy flowing from today's presentations and discussions have certainly renewed my optimism for the future of Indonesia's forests, and I'm sure it has done the same for you. As the president of my country might have said, yes, we can. In one of the subplenaries this morning, I heard Pak Wahyudi Wardoyo paraphrase the U.S. ambassador along the lines of the various P's that are needed for the success of REDD. And I think I'll also adopt that approach, starting with the first P's for the president and for his passion. President Yudhoyono set an incredible tone for today's conference by stressing the importance of forests not just to the world, but to Indonesia's economy, environment, and society. He said, if it weren't for the benefits that our forests provide, then our way of life, our people, our economy, our environment, and our society would be so much poorer. The President said that in implementing the right set of policies and actions to sustainably manage forests is an important priority for him and encourage all of us to support his efforts. And I think we all appreciate just how significant it is that the President took this opportunity pledging to dedicate the last 3 years of his term to this agenda. And his request to business leaders, particularly those in the oil palm, pulp and paper, and mining sectors, to partner with the government to enhance the environmental sustainability of their operations. Another P is for the pledge that the President reiterated to cut Indonesia's greenhouse gas emissions. He said that steps such as the letter of intent with the government of Norway and the 2-year moratorium on new forestry concessions are not goals in themselves, but provide time and resources to review and revise land use policy and practice and improve forest governance. The President said, and I quote, and this is where patience comes in, another P, a long journey awaits us. We know that we must do more to address the primary sources of our greenhouse gas emissions, such as illegal logging, forest encroachment, forest and land fires, and peatland drainage. And indeed, we're working hard and comprehensively to overcome these challenges. I really don't think we could have asked for a stronger statement of his commitment. Following the President's speech, we had a number of speakers and panelists and members of the audience express your views about what the key challenges are and what needs to be done to address them. And I think continuing themes of the P's of all of those statements and discussions were the P for patience, which many of our speakers mentioned. We have to be patient, even though it's not in our nature to be so. But also the need for practical solutions. I stopped in on one of the discussion forums this afternoon and heard Agus Purnomo, known as Punky to many of us, expressing a bit of frustration with the grand list of everything that has to be solved over the next 20 years for REDD to be successful. He made a plea on behalf of the newly reappointed REDD task force for a practical list of what he called winnable fights. And I think during the day today, we have in fact generated a pretty good list of things that can be done by government, by business, by civil society, and especially how the international community can help. Elements of the private sector expressed their eagerness to respond to the President's call for companies to adjust their business models to support the sustainable management of Indonesia's forests. Shinta Kamdani of the Indonesian Chamber of Commerce, Kadin, said that Kadin wants to take an active role in finding a REDD Plus framework that's more workable for business, saying that government and civil society cannot handle this on their own. So maybe another P is for kepastian that's needed by the business community. Kadin has proposed forming a joint working group involving all the stakeholders in the development of a framework that all different stakeholders can participate in. And in fact, the voting results from subplenary number 2 said that the challenge that was most urgent and important was the lack of a clear national level strategy and regulatory framework to support REDD. They also said that it wouldn't hurt if there were more disincentives faced by those whose illegal or unsustainable business models provide unfair competition. Voters in Subplenary 2 said that the most urgent and important action that could be taken domestically was to enhance law enforcement efforts to reduce illegal forest land conversion and degradation. And they chose as the most urgent and important action to be taken by the international community would be to cooperate to close markets and limit finance for illegally and unsustainably produced commodities that compete with REDD+ for forest land. So, urgent law enforcement gets a lot of the votes. But it's not just the business community that wants clarity and certainty. Clearly, local and indigenous communities also need clarity and certainty, particularly about land tenure and resolving land tenure conflicts. Now, I was in the room when the participants in Subplenary number 1 almost rebelled when tenure was not one of the 5 choices that they could choose as the most urgent and important challenge. So instead, they chose pressures from the pulp and paper and mining industries as the most important challenges. But participants in Subplenary 2 identified conflicts over tenure as the second most important challenge, and resolving such conflicts as the second most important priority for domestic action. So clearly resolving land tenure is something that many of you agree on as being a priority. And in one of the discussion forums, I heard Sandra Moniaga Huma complain that the current effort to solve the problem of land tenure is too piecemeal. She argued that the government's master plan doesn't take into account land use conflicts and wanted to clarify that spatial planning, which we've heard a lot about, is not the same as dealing with tenure. And she put a challenge back to the government: which sectoral department is going to take responsibility for resolving the fundamental problems that were created by colonial-era policies? So that is a question that needs to be answered. It's clear that civil society is eager to participate, another P, in the process of reviewing and revising land use policy and practice, as was mentioned by the President this morning. And many stated that one of the most pressing needs is to update the indicative maps that were issued by the Ministry of Forestry as part of the moratorium decree. And in fact, voters in Subplenary number 1 said that the single most urgent and important opportunity for domestic action was to use the current moratorium as an opportunity to review and rationalize forest land use. Now, another P is for policy, and today's discussions revealed a consensus around a number of policy initiatives that the government can take that could lead to win-win solutions. One of those that got a lot of discussion and comment from our speakers is the need to adjust regulations and align incentives to direct plantation expansion to degraded lands. And in fact, the second biggest vote getter in Subplenary 1 for domestic action was to improve land use regulations to remove barriers to the development of new plantations on degraded lands. Another win-win initiative that was the topic of one of our discussion forums would be to increase the efficiency of agricultural land use by both increasing productivity as well as targeting that land use to promote food security while reducing emissions. But as I said this morning, it's not fair to ask Indonesia to do all of this alone, both because the world benefits from Indonesia's forests and because the pressures on Indonesia's forests originate from beyond its borders. And the good news is that we've heard a number of strong statements about the willingness to help on the part of other governments, both donor governments as well as the government of Brazil, to share experience, and the desire to help on the part of multilateral institutions and international business as well. Erik Solheim, the Minister of Environment for Norway, pledged that his country would do its best to make certain that the President would be able to deliver on his promises. And Andrew Steer, the Special Envoy for Climate Change at the World Bank, let me quote this because it's so great and I feel so true. "The world is watching Indonesia with extraordinary admiration and viewing Indonesia as a great beacon of hope. We are sitting on the edge of our seats," and I believe he said, having some sleepless nights. And it would be a massive gift to the world as well as to Indonesia itself. And it is a great joy, he said, to be on this journey with you. And I certainly share that sentiment. But I think the last P is for PR, which was mentioned by a number of our speakers. And I don't mean public relations, but pekerjaan rumah, or homework. And I think that all of us leaving this conference have PR. We have homework to do. And those of us at CIFOR are certainly standing by to do our part and are eager to provide whatever information and analysis is needed to support forward movement in the right direction. Working together, we can do this. Now, before I turn over the floor to our last speaker, let me share some brief expressions of appreciation. This conference would not have been possible without the generous support and funding, time, and expertise of many of the organizations and individuals represented in this room. A special thanks goes to our donors, whose logos are arrayed here: the Norwegian Embassy, the UK Climate Change Unit, the Australian Government's AusAid program, the Climate and Land Use Alliance, the Program on Forests at the World Bank, and the European Union. We also want to thank our media partners, whose logos are arrayed here, who have raised the awareness of many of the key issues that we have addressed at today's conference, including the newspapers Kompas and Jakarta Post, and the radio stations KBR 68H and Green Radio. We are very grateful to all the talented individuals who kindly served on our advisory committees to the conference, including stakeholders from civil society and another made up of business leaders. And in fact, the strong turnout of the business community today was the result of a generous contribution of the Indonesian Chamber of Commerce and the Indonesia Business Council for Sustainable Development. So we're particularly grateful to them. And of course, we particularly want to thank our partners within the government of Indonesia, not least the Ministry of Forestry, which we will hear from in a moment, but also the Office of the Special Advisor to the President on Climate Change, the Presidential Delivery Unit for Development Oversight, and the Office of the Special Advisor to the President on International Relations. Let me also express my deep appreciation to the many speakers and participants who have traveled from across Indonesia and indeed from around the world to be with us today and to share their views, their experiences, and their expertise. And finally, please join me in expressing our thanks to the small army of CIFOR staff who helped plan and implement this event. And with that, it is my honor and privilege to introduce the Minister of Forestry, Mr. Zulkifli Hasan, who will close today's conference. Mr. Minister.